Like a black male lawyer in California is 4 times more likely than a white male lawyer to suffer attorney discipline. I couldn't even grapple with the reasoning behind that, but I think it's super important for women and minority lawyers to understand that like it's even riskier for them. And then you fold in, if you're a solo or a small firm, it's wild how dangerous it can be. And it really is something that you don't know what to look out for, whereas an audit or even a conversation with a solo or a small firm attorney, yeah, I know the top 10 things that are going to cause them problems. And maybe they have some of them under control.
Hello, welcome back. This is Andreea Parc.
And Alexa Dumitru.
And this is a Live Again podcast where attorneys and other professionals meet to discuss real life challenges and how our decisions shaped our journeys. Today, we have the great pleasure of having with us Jeffrey Cunningham. He's an attorney, an outside general counsel for law firms and ethics advice. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being here with us. It's such a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
I've been following you on LinkedIn, and you have so incredibly informational posts. And it's funny that you find ways to bring awareness to attorneys through movies. And I graduated the LLM program at the Cardozo Law School. And the first thing they told us, the first hour, was required movies, Cousin Vinny, and The Firm.
Yep. So I think the rules of professional conduct, because they're so dry and they're so not funny, like if you can connect them to a comedy like My Cousin Vinny, then it's sort of naturally, it's absurd. So it's an easy way to be funny. So, yep.
Yes. And I wish that I knew somebody like you when I was practicing. And I'm very happy to meet you, and I'm very happy to share with the attorneys that are following our channel, because it's super important to have somebody that watches our backs.
100%.
Somebody like you.
The thrust of your podcast, I think, is so necessary for the profession. Our mental health statistics are abysmal compared to the average American. We're like 3 times as likely to suffer from anxiety and depression, of suicidal ideation. And according to the ABA, 55% of all legal mal and ethics claims have some sort of attorney wellness connection. That's either mental health or substance abuse problems. It's really just a huge problem that the profession's facing. I think we're slowly grappling with it, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. I brought up the fact that most attorneys that get into trouble are the ones in the first 10 years of practice.
Yeah. Small firms and of like really solo practitioners, but 10 lawyers or less are the riskiest. And then that first 10 years of practice is extremely risky. So without support, either of a large firm support or a really strong network of mentors, colleagues, etc., attorneys are just, really, really in a dangerous situation. I mean, the ABA tracks, and 72% of all claims are against small law firms of 10 lawyers or less. 1 in 3 legal malclaims are against solo practitioners. And I think there's just a cognitive dissonance where we can't wrap our heads around that, right? Like, why would you do this job if you really realized how risky it can be? And I think a lot of people just don't want to deal with it until it becomes a huge problem. So early in your career and depending on your practice area, it can be a super challenging profession. Even in the best of circumstances, with all the support in the world, it's still incredibly challenging. And I think it's something we're just starting to realize and recognize.
Yeah. From your experience, what do you think are the major pitfalls that attorneys face?
So I think there's so many, but I think the really major pitfalls are trying to do everything. It comes with the profession that we generally have trouble delegating, but really like a smaller firm especially, the lawyer's wearing a bunch of different hats. And getting to that point where you realize, you know what? I'm not the marketing guy. I'm not the billing guy. I need to pay a marketing guy and a billing guy and an IT guy so that I can be the lawyer guy. I think that's a huge step that a lot of lawyers struggle with. Not only are you overextending yourself if you're trying to do everything, but you're not doing it as good as it needs to be, right? Unless you happen to be a CPA too, you're probably not the guy who should be the bookkeeper. So I think wearing all the hats, and look, there's a level where you just have to, but there's a point where you start taking the hats off. And I think that's hard for lots of lawyers, regardless, even if they're at a big firm. I think the other major pitfall, and I don't know if it'll ever be not a pitfall for the profession, is money, right? We control client money in a way that nobody else gets to do. Your banker can't do that. Your tax professional can't do that. But lawyers have just access to client money in a way that's very dangerous. And what I always try to emphasize to clients is today, when things are good, that's when you need to build the protections against your future self. It's easy to say, oh no, I won't do that today. But in 3 years, when there's some other life event, some other issue, you want to have a system in place that's going to stop future you from making a bad choice. And that's not always easy to do. It takes a lot of self-awareness to be able to say, you know what, that's a great point. And I do want to protect, I want to future-proof myself. I just had a client who got themselves in trouble. It was their wedding, and there was a problem with the spouse's family and a payment, and it was the wedding day, right? And, they needed a lot of money to cover this bill, or else the wedding wasn't happening. And, the attorney had to make a choice and didn't make the best choice. And we're working it out. I think it'll all be fine. But had we thought about that years before, that bad choice wouldn't have even been an option. And that's sort of my goal, is to take as much away from the lawyers as possible so that they don't find themselves at the precipice having to make that bad decision.
Yeah, I know. You're bringing some super interesting and current issues that I definitely had. And we all think that we can handle it, and you're absolutely right. You offer turnkey general counsel services to law firms. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so if you haven't had big law, either white shoe fancy or like myself, just big by the numbers, 800 lawyers, if you haven't had that experience, you might not really have encountered a law firm general counsel before. In many ways, it's like any business's general counsel, right? It's just a lawyer for the law firm. And I handle ethics is a huge area of risk. So ethics and malpractice is a big part of what I do, but I also handle employment, cyber, the lobby slip and fall, security with this terrible shooting that happened in the city yesterday or earlier this week, physical security, cybersecurity, whatever challenge the law firm's facing, even marketing and advertising issues, that's what we do. We really support the law firm in whatever issues they're dealing with. The turnkey sort of fractional aspect is recognizing that a 2 or even 50 lawyer firm doesn't need to have a full-time general counsel and maybe doesn't have the resources to pay me $300,000 to hang around and deal with stuff as it comes up. And so we started offering really the piecemeal fractional and a membership-based approach where it's sort of as much as the firm needs. And we've found that the more they get used to using us, right, the more they think, oh, wow, this is a good resource. And so we see more and more use as the relationship develops. And we start to learn more about their practice, their clients, their challenges, and can address things that way. Our law firm clients are all across the country and all different types of practices. I thought plaintiff's personal injury is the riskiest practice area by far. When we launched this, that's where we focused, because we're like, this is super risky. Like, let's help you guys. I have one plaintiff's personal injury firm, right? Most of them are just comfortable being risky because that's the kind of lawyers they are. They understand and accept it. So I've been really surprised with the different practice areas, the different types of firms, and it's been really interesting to see. It comes down generally to smaller firms, 2 to 5 owners that are growing. And once they're growing and taking off those hats, that's when they start to get nervous. Once they're giving responsibilities to other people, it's so much easier to worry about what the other guy is doing than to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, what am I doing? But once that happens, that's when I find that they're really open to getting a help that we can offer.
Yeah. Now that you're talking, I was thinking at my practice. So I was a solo practitioner, And the issue that I had was due to about 25% of my practice of immigration cases. And now I'm thinking that even as a solo practitioner, although probably your services are not very inexpensive, it's worth having an audit done to the practice every year or every couple of years for you or somebody like you to catch anything that's not in order in a law firm. And I would now, with the mind that I have now, going through everything, losing my license and all of that, going to prison, I would definitely do that because it's so important to have a good night's sleep and be knowing that your practice and your license is safe.
Yeah, I mean, so the California bar actually tracks the demographics of their discipline. No other state publishes it. If they do it, they don't tell us about it. California's has revealed, like, for women lawyers and minority lawyers, the discipline statistics are terrible. Like, a black male lawyer in California is 4 times more likely than a white male lawyer to suffer attorney discipline. I couldn't even grapple with the reasoning behind that, but I think it's super important for women and minority lawyers to understand that, like, it's even riskier for them. And then you fold in, if you're a solo or a small firm, it's wild how dangerous it can be. And it really is something that you don't know what to look out for, whereas an audit or even a conversation with a solo or a small firm attorney, yeah, I know the top 10 things that are going to cause them problems. And maybe they have some of them under control. Maybe they don't have some under control. And maybe they haven't even thought about this or that. And so it is really interesting to see what even just a conversation can have with a lawyer. And a perfect example, I think, is our engagement agreements. So many lawyers use whatever the first firm they were at, they took a copy of the engagement agreement. They changed it around a little bit. Usually lawyers are good at updating the fee section, how much money all this is going to cost. But, in New York, we changed from the disciplinary rules to the model rules in 2012. I still see engagement agreements today, 13 years later, that reference the old disciplinary rules, not the current rules of professional conduct. And that means in at least 13 years, but probably 30 years, this thing has never been changed. And it's such a useful tool, and it's such a simple tool to keep that current and fresh and updated and really protect you and the client. And it's overlooked. So it really is wild to think about how just stepping back and looking at your practice can really save you a huge headache down the road.
Huge. Exactly. Yeah. Because sometimes, as you said, we might not even realize what can hit us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Exactly.
I was in the office and I've heard that my practice is investigated by the feds. And I was like, why? I was completely clueless.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yep.
very few attorneys get the feds knocking on their doors, but it's the grievance committee who might
Yep.
do that.
Yep.
Yeah, going to that, every attorney fears the grievance committee. If they do get a letter, should they do the first thing besides calling you? But
So, whether it is law enforcement or it's the grievance committee or it's a tax authority, whatever, you do need to have that break glass. I should call this person, right? Every law firm should have an ethics guy, a criminal guy, a tax guy. You don't have to have me on retainer, but know who I am or somebody like me so that you don't have to waste a day or
right,
more, talking to this guy, to that guy, to that guy, to maybe find somebody. And then it turns out, oh, no, I'm not taking on new clients or something. So having that break glass name and number, I think, is key. The biggest thing when dealing with a grievance is to cooperate. And it is just, I see so many lawyers that have a grievance issue that's relatively minor. Still serious, still could get them in trouble, still definitely something they should work on to provide better client service and safer practice. But if you ignore the grievance committee, that is misconduct. And that alone can get you disbarred. So many lawyers can't handle it. And usually, in my experience, it's almost every single time, there's something else going on. right? There's either a substance abuse problem, there's family problems, there's financial problems, there's mental health problems, or all of those problems, right? All wrapped up. So like a lot of times by the time the grievance comes in, the lawyer can't handle the grievance because they're not even handling, the other problems in their life. And that it really is just a death sentence, because once you don't engage with the grievance committee, they're going to disbar you. I mean, without a doubt, you're in deep, deep trouble at that point. So responding to the grievance committee, cooperating fully, and connecting with counsel who has the experience to sort of guide you through it in the best way possible. It's very similar, and they really act similar to law enforcement. It's the same idea. They're holding all the cards. The only difference is there's absolutely no statute of limitations on ethics violations. So they can come after stuff you did, 25 years ago. The constitutional protections that surround law enforcement, to whatever extent that's useful, that's not there for lawyers and the bar either. You don't really get to remain silent, and search and seizure just isn't a thing. They can access whatever they want. Cooperation, I think, is something that every lawyer has to realize they've just got to do from the outset.
Yeah. And I would like to add one thing from personal experience, that if you're not cooperating because you're afraid they're going to find out about something else in your life, they already know everything.
Yeah.
So I felt like I was naked in the middle of the street. So they actually pulled everything from my entire practice. So they know, and they knew everything. So if they got to that point, there is nothing that you can hide.
Yeah. There's just no benefit to trying. And they don't have the evidentiary standards that law enforcement does. So, they for better or worse, they hold all the cards. And the only thing you can really do is try to face it head on. And what I really like to bring to the table is, okay, what can we show them we've learned from this, right? You're going to have to take whatever punishment ultimately the bar and the courts dole out, and we'll do our best to keep that as limited as possible. That's half the battle. But really, it's looking at the day after, right? Whatever the discipline you get is, whether it's just a letter of advisement saying, oh, you should have done this better, or if it's disbarment. And, in New York, that's 7 years. Letting the bar know right at the outset that in 7 years and a day, here's how I'm going to do things better. And thank you guys so much for your help in showing me what I did wrong. And that's really the best way to approach it, I find. It helps keep the lawyer thinking about the future. It helps the bar sort of accept, all right, this guy is cooperative. So many times it's natural to be defensive and to deny everything and blame the client, even in situations where that's appropriate. And there are plenty of crazy clients out there. I've had crazy clients. We've all had crazy clients. It doesn't help. Right? Even if you should blame the client and it's all the client's fault, that's not going to help you at that point. Sometimes it's hard to get the lawyer to understand that, we've got to focus on you at this point. But that really is important.
Yeah. I help attorneys in the first 10 years of practice to keep focused on what they need to do and have a proper and ethical life. And I teach radical responsibility. Because without taking responsibility, yes, there are crazy clients that happen. But from my personal experience, I've put myself into that situation. And if I don't take responsibility for putting myself in that situation, how can I learn something from it? And how can I move forward?
Yep, 100%. It really is. And that sort of goes back to my idea of protecting yourself against the you in the future, right? Making it so, that, because look, I don't think any lawyer is gets to the point where they do something that's in violation of the rules and thinks, oh yeah, I want to break the rules. This is a great idea, right? They feel like they don't have any other option. And so it's sort of inevitable at that point. And really to think about what we can do to stop the inevitable, I think is key. And the reality also is, your work with lawyers early on is law school, it doesn't really prepare us to practice law. And it certainly doesn't prepare us to deal with the burdens of practicing law. And I think, that's something it's maybe doing now, to the extent that it's teaching lawyers how to practice law. It's sort of dealing with wellness and ideas like that as well. But, when I went to law school, I went to Fordham, great law school. I took one required ethics course. And I passed the MPRE, and I didn't study for the MPRE. I just sat down and took the test. It was multiple choice, and I passed. And that was it. And my ethics course it was a fantastic course, but it was on comparative ethics. So it was the model rules compared to a bunch of European professional conduct rules. It had no bearing on what I do today, even, let alone what I would need to know as a young lawyer. So we really do sort of throw young lawyers to the wolves in practice, but also from the ethics side. It's not the best system, it just isn't.
Yeah, definitely law school doesn't teach us what we face when we start practicing.
Right.
In the cyberspace, because I know that you're helping attorneys with that, what safeguards do you think an attorney should have or a law firm?
Yeah. So the cyber space is sort of enveloping everything we do, and AI is sort of a whole nother boogeyman that's out there. But I always like to just tie it into the lock on your front door, right? And, the bar, the court, no one's ever going to be like, oh, you used this kind of deadbolt, but you should have used that kind of deadbolt, right? Nobody's ever going to do that. But if you don't have a deadbolt, right, then the court or the bar is going to be like, what do you mean you didn't have a lock on your front door? Right? You used an interior lock? That's crazy. And the same, that sort of analogy, you have to have some plan, whether you're a solo, whether you're a 1,000 lawyer firm, whether you use a lot of tech, whether you don't use a lot of tech. Simply using Microsoft and assuming Microsoft is getting the job done, that's a recipe for disaster. So I like really simple solutions like multi-factor authentication. It's annoying, right? You got to look at your phone, you got to put the number in, whatever. But that's a super easy way to protect your email. By doing small things like that, I think you can score lots of points. So what I recommend for small firms, even if you can't or you don't think you can afford cyber insurance, I always recommend applying for cyber insurance because it's expensive, but it's affordable and you get a lot out of it. So maybe you actually do buy the insurance. But even if you don't, the cyber insurance broker is going to give you the survey that the insurance companies require. And it'll have 20 to 30 items. And some of them you won't even know what they mean. I mean, I look at lots of these things, and some of them I'm like, yeah, well, we don't do that, I don't think. I don't know. But a lot of them will suggest things like multi-factor authentication in opening your email, where you go to open your email on your computer and an app pops up on your phone and you click, yeah, it's me. And then your computer knows it's you. And you can get that from the cyber hygiene checklist that the insurance companies require. It's a great way to up your cyber game. Now, you can't do it all, maybe you can. But chances are you're going to find a few nuggets in there that are really pretty easy, pretty cheap to employ. And it's just going to raise your cyber hygiene up to a really comfortable point. And I think the other huge aspect is, CLEs, continuing education. It's required everywhere. I think generally lawyers do not get much out of CLEs. They cram it into the end of the reporting period. The last week they do all the credits. I really urge clients to take lots of cyber and ethics CLEs. Now, obviously, I give a lot of ethics CLEs, so of course I'm going to say it's important. But really staying at the forefront and just understanding the different scams. We're running pen testing right now where we sent out, a fake spam email about a subpoena to see how many of our people, click on the link that they shouldn't click on, right? And it's interesting to see, like, look, it doesn't matter how, cybersecurity lawyers get caught by these scams. They're scammers. That's what they do. So, like, it doesn't, it's not a matter of, like, oh, that person's stupid and they clicked on the link. Like, who knows what else you're dealing with, and this link comes through and it looks like it's an emergency and you click on something you shouldn't have. It happens. If it didn't happen, the scammers wouldn't do it. So I think, really using the cyber insurance as a checklist of what you can do and what you can build in easily, and maybe getting the insurance if you can. And then also keeping the education up and keeping the cyber risks at the forefront, because it is a never ending and expanding risk that law firms have to deal with.
Yeah. I believe that every problem has a solution. But why get there if you can protect yourself or prevent that from happening? So
Exactly.
prevention is always the best thing.
I think it was maybe Ben Franklin or one of those guys said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's so true.
And talking about prevention, the reason why Alexa is my co-host is because she was the one who took the hit when I went in.
Mm-hmm.
So she's here to show people what can kids go through. So maybe you have a nugget of wisdom for attorneys to protect themselves and protect their children ultimately.
Yeah, and I can't imagine what that could have been like. And I think it's so great that you guys are both together giving back. I love even just the title of your podcast, I think is so inspiring. And really like lets people know, and lawyers in particular, but the public as well, that there is life after this. And you have to have that kind of long distance vision. And I think for attorneys that are parents, I'm actually part of a Dad Esquire. It's a group for dads. I'm a dad. I have an 8-year-old and 6-year-old. And there's lots of women affinity groups for moms that I think are great too. I think the Dad Esquire is like one of the few dad ones I've seen. But I think keeping your eye on the prize, right? If you have children, especially, like that, I think lets you look into the future in a way that, when I was a younger lawyer and I didn't have kids, I didn't worry about, 50-year-old Jeff the same way I do now. I knew he'd be okay because whatever, I could figure it out. So I think realizing that you're not only future-proofing yourself, but you're future-proofing your family's welfare and well-being, and trying to think about the toll it would take on your family if you got in trouble. Whether that's with law enforcement, the bar, or even with your firm, if it was something where you got terminated, thinking about that risk and then realizing that means you need to do something today so you don't have to deal with that tomorrow, I think is absolutely huge. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing. It's such a service to the profession. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Tell us about the book, because that was so funny.
Yeah, we've got the Model Rules of Professional Conduct Junior, and it's your baby's first book of legal ethics. And, it's got each rule. I came up with a picture and a very short saying. It's more of a gag book than anything, right? Because, my kids didn't really like it. It wasn't compelling. The funniest thing I think about it is I've actually had lawyers buy it to send to opposing counsel, right? To be like, you need the baby book on ethics. I think any way that we can sort of bring ethics into our daily life, whether it's talking about my cousin Vinny, or on LinkedIn, I have a page where I talk about the model rule meme a day. So I make a meme out of every rule. Sometimes they're stupid, sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're both. I think every day just touching on the rules of professional conduct and thinking about, all right, I'm dealing with 1.6 today. How can I incorporate confidentiality, client confidentiality? How can I do one little thing today that's going to make my practice better, serve my clients better, and make everybody safer? I think a little bite each day sort of leads to really big dividends and pays off in the long run.
Now that we're getting closer to the end, I want to ask you, as a lawyer, for example, I take myself, right, a solo practitioner. What would you recommend for that lawyer to do?
Yeah, so I mean that goes to the heart of my risk management approach, and it really is. It doesn't matter where you're located or what your practice area is. If you're a solo, more than any other lawyer, but even if you're at a 1,000-person firm, I think this applies too. That's saying that it takes a village to raise a child. Lawyers have to understand that you're a solo practitioner, but you're not alone, and you shouldn't try to do it alone. Doing it alone is going to lead to disaster, right? So if you have non-lawyer staff, your spouse, your colleagues, your friends, a mentor, even if you use a process server, like you contract with a vendor for process servers or copying, even your custodial staff that cleans your office, your landlord, whatever, realize that you're not alone. Reach out to those. Now, maybe your landlord's not going to be that helpful. I happen to like my landlord. He's a great guy and a friend. Maybe yours isn't. But like your insurance company, your LPL carrier, they have a vested interest in you being as safe as possible. Use them. You're paying them. They're a great resource. People you went to law school with. It doesn't even have to be a lawyer, right? A friend who's an accountant or a friend who's an insurance broker, other professionals, and understanding how they deal with risk. I think that's the biggest thing. It's just recognizing that like you're really not alone, even if you're a true solo, and that you can't do it alone, and nobody should. It's not healthy, and it's not going to last. It's just not.
My experience is we tend as attorneys to be that know-it-all, but sometimes we need help. And if we would be more open into asking for help and recognizing that we need help, that would take us a long way.
Exactly. And I really think that's why large law firms are way more protected, because when I don't know something, I have my partners that I can say, oh, this is an XYZ question, and that's what you do. So like you handle this one. When you're a solo, there's just this like artificial level of perfection that you're supposed to know everything and do everything. And It's just not sustainable. I mean, nobody could do that. Superman couldn't do that. So,
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, and now that we are approaching the end, and because the podcast is called Alive Again, there is one question that I ask every guest. What is one activity in your life that makes you feel more alive?
that's a cool question. I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't say like spending time with my family. I love my kids, of course, of course. But putting them aside, for me, and this is a little embarrassing, but COVID hit and I was like stuck in my house and I didn't know what to do. And my wife was like, "You need a hobby." And I was like, "I don't have a hobby." That's, yeah, all right. So I actually Googled how to find a hobby, and Google gave me a quiz, and I took the quiz, and it told me I should take up gardening. And I was like, that's weird. I don't know about that. But I tried it, and I actually like gardening. I'm not very good at it. I have a very expensive garden, with like hundreds of dollars invested in. I grow a few tomatoes. I have a ton of mint. If you ever need mint, let me know. I'll get you my mint. And then I have a small Concord grape vine that someday I'm going to make some wine out of. Right now, it's only giving me about 6 grapes, so it's going to take a long time. But yeah, I think gardening, getting outside, actually getting my hands dirty, bugs, all that stuff. And, embarrassingly, it was totally because I Googled a quiz on how to find a hobby because I'm so lame that I didn't have a hobby. So, but I think anything you can find that isn't work, right? And in some ways, I love my family and stuff. They're work too, right? They are. And so, yeah, for me, I feel very alive when I'm just out there goofing around in the little garden I have.
Yeah. And put it in my own words, is connecting with nature.
Yeah.
Because basically that's what it is.
That's it. It's being outside.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you, guys.
It's so important, this conversation for attorneys. And your work is fantastic. And keep up the funny memes on LinkedIn.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Our listeners, thank you so much for listening. And for more conversations and more guests, please subscribe and follow us. Thank you. We'll see you next week.